Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Compassion and Courage, Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel, and this is the podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. Today, I am super excited and honored to have Dr. Jason Wolf. Jason is a Ph.D. and a CPXP. I feel like we're in good company together, Jason, since I have those letters behind my name as well. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Marcus. You were one of the very first ones I know that got CPXP. So we've a growing number around the world. So it's exciting.
Yeah. Did I just read today that we have 1,400 in our midst?
Yeah. We could get close to 2,000 potentially here relatively soon. So it's amazing, huh?
That's amazing. So where should we start? I mean, you're the director of the Patient Experience Institute and PXI, and for those who are in clinical but may not understand what the Beryl Institute is and the CPXP designation, can you just start us a little bit at what the organization is and then how you got involved and how you came to this work in clinical, but not necessarily 100% clinical type of healthcare work?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the chance to kind of share that background. And again, I'm just really honored and humbled to be with you, Marcus, and your voice and your work in this space has been so incredibly, I think, heartfelt, beneficial, and contributed so much to elevating and pushing this conversation forward. So really honored by the invitation to join you today. But, it's been an interesting journey. I lived in the provider side of healthcare for a number of years, and the short story is we realized an opportunity to create a space for people to come together to collaborate, share ideas, elevate the knowledge around what experience was in healthcare. Hard to believe this is now over 12 years ago for me that I left the delivery side of care to help start the Institute. And since that time in 2012, with this vision of creating a globally relevant and connected community around a community of practice, sharing of knowledge, and really trying to change the nature of healthcare. We have literally grown from an idea to an organization now over 60,000 strong with members in 85 countries around the world. And the Institute, the Beryl Institute itself, has really been that collecting point for the voices of the global experience movement, bringing together patients and family members such as yourself, bringing together healthcare professionals, consultants, and vendors in a tapestry of people really committed to having an elevating conversation on the human experience in healthcare. And we have been driven by that desire to transform the human experience in healthcare these days, to ensure that patients and family voices of what matters is considered, that the workforce experience is considered, and that the community experience, the issues of equity access that we have to address in today's healthcare world, is also part of the conversation. So the Institute has been that foundational piece that we brought that community together. And if I can briefly, you asked about Patient Experience Institute is an organization, a sister organization to the Beryl Institute that we founded, now it's hard to believe, almost 10 years ago, designed specifically to offer the designation and really help solidify the profession that is patient experience. And so it is a institute that offers a psychometrically validated certification examination in which people sit, take an exam, achieve the designation of CPXP, sustain and maintain continuing education credits. And that community as well represents patients and family members, clinicians. It represents, folks that are passionate about this work around the world. And as we were just discussing, almost now closing in on 2,000 strong, who say, I am committed to being a professional in this work. And it's really made a significant difference to take the knowledge of the Institute with the professional designation of the Patient Experience Institute to truly try to push this conversation forward in ways that really matter. And I think you exemplify how that comes to bear every day.
When I wrote The Other End of the Stethoscope back in 2006, and after this, my memoir prior to that, I was writing for the caregivers at the bedside, saying, hey, here's some just different language. And I don't even know if we had the term, quote unquote, patient experience at that time. And I think those who are not in this world of healthcare might not understand. They're like, isn't it always top of mind? Hasn't it always been top of mind? And the serious answer to that is no, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question, and I think you encountered what it could be back when you had your incident, right? And you met people that understood in their innate being what it meant to provide a human, compassionate connection with a patient to help them heal and then thrive as a result, right? And I think that for so long we used to see this conversation as satisfaction, like how happy someone was with an expectation or the smiley faces that we rate people. But I think, as you and I know, and I think you speak to this often, the experience we're talking about is the engagement, the interaction with the human being in front of us in all of their entirety, right? The emotions that they bring to bear, the questions and concerns they might have, the clinical realities that they're facing, and how those all interplay in the stories that they tell. I mean, it is those interactions, human being to human being, that fundamentally undergird the entire experience conversation. And to your point then, Marcus, I would say that is a relatively new dialogue. I mean, it has roots decades long, but our explicit conversation about it may be a decade and a half in terms of what we've really been doing to move the needle and elevate that discussion.
And you kind of said it without saying it there, but one of the things that I so appreciate, and one of the reasons that the Beryl Institute is the global leader in this space, is because of the definition of what is patient experience. And I think that's why Beryl has grown to be the global community, because it's based on that foundational definition. Could you give us that definition, and how what was the story that came to craft that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, I talked about 12 years ago, we were, you know, and prior to that, really putting together the plans for what an institute around experience could be. And the realities, you know, I'm an old trained diplomat, I'm an old organization psychologist and change guy, and the reality is you need a stake in the ground, a target, an understanding that people can share contextually to begin to move forward from. And so it was one of the very first things we believed was necessary, was this definition of what experience was. And so with the voices that we could find at the time, this was in the summer of 2010, we started little virtual conversation groups. And through the voices of the fledgling institute community at the time, we came up with these words, right? Interactions were important. The culture of organizations we build in healthcare critical. That the continuum of care is the measurement structure in which we understand experience happens. It's not simply in clinical boxes, but across that continuum of care. And it is the perceptions of patients and family members of their care partners that actually tell us whether we're doing well or not. And so those words came together in this definition of the sum of all interactions shaped by an organization's culture that influence patient perceptions across the continuum of care. And that has really become foundational to our work, right? That as human beings caring for human beings in healthcare, it's the interactions that matter. I think your story, Marcus, exemplifies this in ways that we couldn't put in words. And then the fact that the cultures, the kind of organizations we build, enable someone like the nurse that held your hand to do what she did. And creating those cultures in our healthcare organizations, as we've discovered, I think, just in the last few years through the pandemic, is so integral to our ability to provide the best outcomes overall, clinically or emotionally, for our patients and family members. So that definition, I appreciate what you say, has been a cornerstone, a bedrock of all that we've done from day one.
And it's really what I think should be at the heart, at least the understanding of that definition should also be within the heart of an organization's mission, vision, and values too. That ultimately we're trying to help create an environment where those healing human relationships can happen and thrive.
Yes.
How did you come to this idea that that the patient experience is so important? When, like you said, you're an organizational guy. How did you get inspired to bring this into the more human level?
Yeah, I think, coming from an international relations background, I was always interested in those boundaries between people. And most of them are made up, right? I mean, we draw lines on maps, we create distinctions between people. And I've always seen and believed that the way that we can strive and create excellence to achieve outcomes is at that touch point, that friction point, that membrane between one human being and another, whether it's in the way we interact in business, whether it's in the way we interact in sort of our international relations, one nation to another, and most importantly, as we relate one human being to another. And really, when I found myself working more and more in healthcare, the aha moment was this is the place where human interaction, above all else, is the most critical. That if we could create a place that focused on having that conversation in a safe way, having that conversation in an open way where we could be vulnerable with each other about our own issues and our own mistakes as healthcare individuals and organizations, where we could thrive to grow and learn together, which wasn't a conversation on competition around how much volume you got at your hospital across town from mine, but more so was how are we caring for the communities we serve every day and working to rise that tide for all who engage in healthcare. That was the inspiration for me. So call me a bit of an idealist or a humanist, a globalist, whatever word you want to use. I've always believed in the power that when people break down boundaries and find common ground, whether they agree with each other fully or not, great things can occur. And I think we've seen that come to bear in the Institute, where people have been willing to come together, even in the most competitive healthcare organizations, to drive change for the better for all. And I think that's been inspiring for me to even see from the voices and actions of our community members themselves.
So like you said, you built this over the last decade and a half, and by you, I mean we, the global community here. Yeah. But that's kind of been the foundational building for the last 10, 15 years. Mm-hmm. Where do you see patient experience being, say, 10 years from now, 5 years from now?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think, part of this was the field of dreams idea, right? If you build it, they will come. And I think we all showed up. And I want to reinforce what you said. This is the Institute, the community, our global movement on experience, and this leads to the future conversation, isn't about anything that I did. I helped foster a space, but it was these thousands and thousands and thousands of voices over the years that have come together to really say, this is the way it should be and what we can do about it. And to me, that is the foundation on which we build to the future, right? The potential is that we, I think collectively, and I appreciate you using that word, as a community, have pushed the conversation beyond one just around how I did it in a survey, right? It's not like in the United States, for instance, when we measure ourselves on CAP surveys or other things. It's not just a score that we get. It is really the way we engage our communities, the way we care for our workforce. So for me, where I see this moving is that conversation on the human experience, that we can't have a conversation around patient experience in isolation from that of our workforce experience. We can't do those in isolation of what happens in the communities that we serve, the health and well-being of the places in which our healthcare organizations operate, the real life stories that bring people to our doors, regardless of what door it might be in healthcare. And so what I see, what I actually am hearing, and which is really encouraging, is people acknowledging that interaction between all those pieces. I used the word tapestry before, and I think we've created an intricately beautiful, complex tapestry of the patient questions of what matters, the workforce needs for their purpose and healing, the community needs for health and well-being, all being integral. And if we want to look for a silver lining, Marcus, in like the last few years, what this pandemic has given us is an insight into our humanity, our vulnerabilities, but the reality is that all of those things matter and that we can't take them for granted. We can't just say they're important and not do something about them. And so we've been inspired in the face of chaos and horror, right? And I think only good things will evolve as a result of that.
I'm excited to hear that, and I love that you've brought in the equity and inclusion aspect, not only into employment and engagement. Are you familiar by chance with Dr. Lisa Iazoni's paper that came out a year or two ago on... I'm sorry.
Dangerously not enough. Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah. And so I feel like that's where we're kind of at these days, is we're also having to change perceptions throughout our society that then trickle down into our healthcare institutions. And I'm so glad that we're embracing within the Beryl Institute this idea of diversity, equity, inclusion for everybody, no matter who you are that rolls in the door, because ultimately, again, we're all human, right? Yeah. We're all human.
That is our common denominator.
Yeah. So with that, one of the I'd like to give you the opportunity to share some stories here, because at the beginning of my semester, which will be this Thursday, actually, I will be posing all of my pre-med students to write their first reflection paper. And I asked them just to write a 2-page paper reflection about a time that someone was there for them or a time that they were there for another. That simple idea of presence and being and compassion. Do you have a story that you link to compassion or witnessing of compassion in your own life?
Yeah, it's an almost an inverted story, and I appreciate the question. And it was one that I didn't know influenced me as much as it did, or maybe found helped me find my way to healthcare in ways I didn't understand. But when I was young, my parents divorced when I was early in life, and we ended up living with my grandparents. And my grandmother, she was an incredible force for me in making sure I did the things I needed to do. She was also a teacher's assistant, so she sometimes would drive me home from school. I had to do my homework before I could go out and play, and then I could maybe get a Twinkie too, right? And my grandmother was a quiet but powerful force in that way, and was always so influential in my life in terms of making priorities and thinking things were important, of caring for other people. Fast forward a few years, and my grandmother became one of the first and earliest cases diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. We didn't even really know what it was at the time. It was in the early 80s. They were starting to talk about it. She was someone that they actually said had Alzheimer's, and I watched this woman who I had lived with as a child, who had helped raise me, just quickly slide down a back slope. And I remember there was a moment in time, I came home, my grandfather was crying on the front porch. He couldn't even go inside. I went inside, gave her a hug. She couldn't recognize me, but somewhere in that hug that she gave me, I felt the moment that she did, like that little squeeze, that somewhere through all the clouds, she realized it was me. And not long after that, we had to take her, and she went to, at the time, they didn't really have a lot of solutions. She went to a nursing home. And I would go visit my grandmother. I would sit at her bedside and watch her. And this was a woman I loved who raised me. And I would watch nurses, I know, probably busy doing their thing, walk into the room, literally just say hi, and then roll her over like a piece of meat. And I sat there almost flabbergasted, like, do you not understand that this is a human being that deserves the attention, even if they are aware of it or not? They're very aware of the compassion that they need. And then there was this one nurse one day that walked in, and she stopped. She put her hand on my grandmother's head, just kind of literally caressed her head and said, "Florence," which was her name, "I know you're there, and I know things probably aren't easy, but your grandson is here, and you are loved and well cared for." And I just remember like breaking down in tears, because finally someone saw my grandmother not for this kind of mindless piece of meat, which was the anger I was carrying into bed, but as a human being with a life story and a family that loved her, that they were trying to care for, even though they knew there was nothing that they could do. I carried that for a long time myself, Marcus. I never knew I would be in healthcare. And it wasn't until actually after the Institute started and I was reflecting on what might have been my inspiration, did I realize that was like a deeply planted seed in my soul that in some ways I had buried. But that need to be there for people is so important, so integral, and not only for the person that's lying in the bed, but for the people that love them. And that's when I realized how important that idea of compassion, of presence, of our humanity was.
How old were you when that experience with the compassionate nurse took place?
I was probably 15.
Still impressionable, and that got tied into your mind about what compassion is.
I was just old enough to sneak the car out to drive over to the nursing homes.
Nice.
And sit there, like she did with me when I was younger, and so.
Yeah, roles become reversed.
Yep.
As life moves on.
Indeed, it does.
Yeah. I'm super interested in this idea. I've heard from other people in the field that when we talk about patient experience, could we not distill it down even further and just call it compassion or just call it love?
Yeah.
Even. And I feel like I like that idea because, who doesn't love love? Mm-hmm. But it's greater than that when we start to get into workforce and systems that are set up, etc. What do you think then, or what are the best ways that you have seen organizations instill those human emotions of compassion and love and caring, how do you see them? Where have you seen it best fostered?
Yeah, I would say, and I'll give a broader answer than like a specific place, but I would say where I've seen it done well is coming back to that premise we've been sharing throughout our conversation, that first and foremost in healthcare, we're human beings caring for human beings. And organizations where they've been successful have given people the space to acknowledge that and then act into that. Where they have not made experience, like you said, I think people want to drill down in it. They haven't made it a thing to do. I think that's where we've missed a lot on this. Where we've said, okay, experience is a score to achieve or a specific checklist item. Because what happens is our care teams, our providers think, well, this is something else you're asking us to do. It becomes a task with a check. And that's not, like, to your point, you don't just say, well, today is the day I love somebody and tomorrow I'm going to take a break, right? Or today's the day I show compassion, but tomorrow I'm going to tuck it away in my bag for next week. I mean, those are ongoing, perpetual pieces of our humanity. And so when I see organizations that have been able to create the space for people to be human, to have the freedom to make that choice, what it takes to be human in the presence of someone, and know that it is the expectation of the kind of organization that they want to be, versus the things they're asking people to do, is where I see not only success, but sustained success. You have to apply tactics on that, yes. But if your first response is tactics, we're going to do rounding and we're going to communicate in this way and we're going to respond to call outs in 3 seconds and all those kind of things, we've gotten to a level of tactics that never acknowledge a human beneath it, versus the other way around. And I think that's really important and where I've seen the greatest success.
And that's almost the complaint that we first heard in the very early days of HCAPs, that this is too prescribed.
Yeah.
Let me just do it naturally, right? Mm-hmm. And I'd love to be able to think that everybody could handle that, but we know that people need examples. They need stories. 100%. They need vocabulary. They need to know how to articulate the right response in the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is true. I mean, people ask, what's the secret to experience that you've seen over all these years? And I say it's kind of choice. It sounds very hard to put your hands around, but it is the choice that one human being makes in the face of another one, or maybe through technology these days too, right? And to have the space, the training, the understanding, the commitments, the expectations to make good choices in those moments matter. And if you understand what drives choice, it's freedom. And if you actually now, the word geek in me says, if you get to the roots of freedom, it is love. I mean, the Old English roots of freedom are actually to love and be loved. And so those are all connected. Our ability to express that love for someone, that compassion for someone. And what I love about the word compassion, which is so essential, I think, to so much of what you say, Marcus, is that it's not just about feeling something for someone else. It's doing something about it. And when we frame experience as something in that way, that it's about action, it's not just about after action or reaction, I think that's the difference. And I think people do still, in a chaotic environment of healthcare, need structure. They need process. They need understanding of that. This is not just a thing to do, but there are things we can do to drive good outcomes, to honor the human being in front of us. And that's really, I think, what we can ultimately aspire to each and every day too.
Yeah, you're doing that every day. I'm trying to do that every day. Mm-hmm. I think those of us in healthcare who have either been at the other end of the stethoscope or have a family member who has suffered, we understand that more intimately and more deeply.
Yeah.
So. Well, in our time that we have left here, I'd like to shoot a couple of rapid fire questions past you. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's go.
So for a year, I've been kind of asking about the same questions, and I kind of keep getting some of the same answers. So I thought I'd throw in a few super random ones for you today. How's that sound?
I love it.
All right. So one of the questions I want to keep is if you could live for one day as any fictional character, whether it's from a book, a movie, comic book, Netflix series, what other person would you want to live as for one day?
Okay, a character for a day. Wow, that's a great question. I'm going to just go with what popped in my mind when you asked the question, because I trust that first. For some reason, it was Luke Skywalker.
Okay.
And probably because I'm a Star Wars geek, I grew up. It was one of my first theater experiences going in 1976 to see Star Wars. But I mean, it's the sort of that arc journey, self-discovery, but making a difference. Not about me, but around the change that we can create if we do what's right and good. And so yeah, I'll say Luke Skywalker. Plus, I think it'd be really cool to be able to zing a lightsaber around and jump around like that.
Right. There's some pretty cool adventures that go along with that too.
Yeah.
Good. So I know that you're a marathoner too.
I have been. When I was a little younger, my knees were better. I haven't been on a full marathon in a few years since my kids, but yeah.
But you're an avid runner.
I still try to do that as much as I can, indeed, yeah.
When you're running, what do you listen to?
It really, a lot of times nature. Mm-hmm. It's actually, because we do so much talking in life, for a long time, I didn't bring anything at all. And I try to find places where I could run and just take in the world around me. And so it's really interesting. I don't have a running playlist that I use on a regular basis. I actually try to find places where I can run where there's trees, and I can just be there. It's a chance almost for me to escape. And it's the chance to kind of release all of the stuff in my head versus jumble it up. So I would say the things I listen to most in running is the world around me than anything else.
That's yeah. And I mean, there's so many reasons for that too. It's like, how can you hear a car horn if you've got your headphones on?
I got kids now. I don't want to get run over by a truck or something like that.
Right. So I have friends from college and that were runners, and they said that they really like to go and run in cemeteries. Very little traffic, obviously quiet. You can kind of get a quieter environment inside the cemetery than the acres or blocks around you that so you're not right out on the street. So there you go. Go run in a cemetery sometime.
Try that one. Commune with our former spirits and later.
Yeah. So if you had, let's say you're stranded on a desert island, and yet you can only take one album or piece of music with you. Do you have a certain piece of music that is who you are at your core?
I think it might. Well, it's going to be Aaron Copland as a composer, and I'd be really hard pressed. But you can actually get him on the same album if that counts. Fanfare for a Common Man and Appalachian Spring, because the combination of those is really one of a declaration of our humanity and the strength and boldness which we can tackle the world. And at the same time, Appalachian Spring is around, to me, the sense of freshness, discovery, the vulnerability of newness and birth. That's sort of really intriguing and interesting. That was the soundtrack that actually I played during my dissertation writing a lot. Was I go from Fanfare to Common Man to Appalachian Spring, and sometimes on loop, when I spent hours and hours writing. So, but to me, that's just the one. I could listen to those forever, and it would just, kind of speaks to two sides of a very important coin for me.
It's been years since I've listened to Aaron Copland, and I'm going to have to. You've inspired me to go do it again this afternoon.
I remember when I was young, I had a chance to go, and I grew up in New York, and I got to go to Lincoln Center on a school trip, and we got to peek through the window at a rehearsal, and he was actually in there helping direct at the time, and so I got to see him be director for a few minutes through a window. It was pretty wild when I was young, and maybe that's what stuck with me.
Yeah,
too.
that'll certainly sink that link into your brain a little more.
Yes, indeed.
So for my last question for you is, if you had the biggest billboard on top of the world's highest mountain, what is the message that you would like to convey to humanity?
Don't put billboards here. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, good point.
Care for each other.
Care for each other.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you're climbing that mountain, don't push the person out of the way in front of you because they're not going fast enough, but try to help them up. If you're getting ahead of someone and you see them slipping down, reach an arm down and help them up. Tap the billboard, sign your name to it, but care for each other. And If we do that in a way that's truthful instead of so much of what's, I think, tearing at the seams of our global humanity right now, we'd be such a better place. And I think we all deserve that and should aspire to it.
Yeah, yeah. Just care for each other. It's not rocket surgery, right? It's just being human.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Jason, thank you so much for being with me today. I love this conversation. I'd love to have the opportunity to hear a little bit more about your story and your life outside of the Beryl Institute. So thank you again so much for being with me today.
So honored and humbled to be invited again, and so great to be with you as well, my friend.
Thank you. And I will put links to all your social media and to the Beryl Institute in the show notes today, and I look forward to helping continue to do my part to expand this work.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason, and thank you all listeners for being here for this episode of Compassion and Courage, Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel, and this is the podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. Thank you to everyone who continues to share and save and like and do all those retweets and all that kind of social media interaction for the podcast. We thank you very much. It really helps us get the work out. And thank you all again for joining me for this episode of Compassion and Courage.